Running the floor. Embiid stuffs it. Harden for three. James Harden with his second triple.
What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the Pick Swap Podcast. I'm here with a special guest today, Josh Reynolds, host of the That's Ball Folks podcast and esteemed social media personality. So, Josh, how are you today?
What's up, Sean? How are you, man?
Doing good. Happy to have you on.
Thanks, dude. Thanks for having me. Truly honor. I've been a big fan of yours and the podcast for a while. So when you reached out and asked if I wanted to join, it was an easy decision. I'm honored to be here.
I appreciate that, man. That means a lot. Before we get too heavy into it, I do want to give a shout out to our sponsor, BetUS. BetUS is one of the leading sportsbooks and casinos in the marketplace. Check in with them for all your NBA Finals needs, futures drafts, or anything else you could look for. Use code PickSwap at login and make sure to hit the link in our description for a risk-free bet up to $500. Now, to get into things, Josh, you have a little bit of a kind of different storyline for most of the guests that we kind of have come on. So what's kind of your story on getting into Sixers basketball, and what's it like kind of enjoying the pain of Philly sports all the way out there in Utah?
Yeah, so I'm based in Utah right now. So I've been out here for a while. All my family's still Philly area back there. So it is, as you can imagine, being in Utah and being a Philly sports fan raises a set of unique challenges. But it's good, man. It's honestly, now that Simmons is gone, it kind of relieved a lot of the heartache and a lot of the beef I had with Utah fans. But it's good. So my kind of Philly fandom dates back to as long as I can remember. Honestly, my first like actual Sixers memory was I'm sure with a lot of people, was the step over in the finals. That was like the first moment. Loved Iverson. I mean, just a little kid, right? It's like, oh, this dude is a man. He loves rap, tatted up, looks sweet. He's unlike anybody else. And yeah, that finals run was like the solidifying time for me. I was 10 years old then, so that's kind of what locked me in. And then uniquely and lucky enough, I have family who have worked for the team for a long time, so it's been able to kind of lock me in. And unfortunately, I never had a choice, just like the rest of us. It's just pain and suffering all the way around.
Yeah, it's been all downhill from there, right?
Yep. So some little bright spots, but yeah.
Yeah, so the Sixers find themselves in kind of an interesting spot right now. It's kind of weird, like this playoff exit, as much as it's obviously super disappointing not to get past the second round again, and obviously everything else like still falling short of the goals. But in a way, it was almost like this exit was kind of one of the less kind of painful exits. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would agree. It kind of, I mean, the expectations that this team has every year, I was thinking about it earlier, and honestly, listening to your guys' last episode, both yourself and James kind of nailed it, where it's like the further removed you get from the season, the more numb you become, and the more like you can kind of see the light at the end of the tunnel and like, okay, things are going to be okay. But this last season was just kind of a strange ending compared to like the Hawks ending, right? The season prior, where it was like, that was just soul crushing and infuriating. And so, yeah, the end of the season was weird. I mean, the Embiid injury, I think, just kind of took all the life out of everything. And I mean, I can't speak for everybody, but it just seemed kind of to soften the blow when we went out. I feel like we all agree, if Embiid doesn't get hurt, I truly think we beat Miami. So when that happens, it's just like, well, nothing we can do. Like, we just got to move on.
Yeah, totally. And I don't think it's kind of acknowledged enough just like how seriously he was hurt with that. Like, who knows what percentage that guy was really really was out on the court out there. I mean, surgery on both hands. He obviously had the facial fracture. Just so much going on there. That is crazy he even played in that series.
Yeah, I mean, it just makes, you can't love the guy even more. Like, he sums up and solidifies Philly unlike, I mean, very few athletes have in history of Philly, right? It's like the dude's out there playing with concussion, jacked up hands. Like, what else do you want from the guy? He embraces and embodies everything that the city's about. And yeah, I'll always love him for it.
Yeah, 100%. It's been so cool watching his whole evolution as a player and a person here in Philadelphia, and he really is a guy that just truly gets it. So I guess that's kind of the everlasting hope around this team is Joel Embiid, that as long as he's here in the city, as long as he is a Philadelphia 76er, they have some sort of shot at a championship. Obviously, it didn't quite come together this year. The James Harden trade didn't turn out exactly as everyone was hoping. That's kind of the $1 million question for this offseason. And I guess how many $1 million is really the question for this offseason. But I mean, do you agree James Harden will be back, and how do you feel about that?
Yeah, I think that when we made the trade, like, you don't get rid of Simmons, even if he's not going to play. You don't get rid of him for a guy that you're just going to take a flyer on and say, hey, thanks for the quarter of the season you played for us. You're out of here. Like, I 100% think he'll be back. The dollar amount, like you said, that's the question, right? I will be personally shocked if he doesn't opt in to his player exception, but I mean, who knows? He's been on record saying that he's willing to take less money. Is that just PR? Is that him being cool and trying to appeal to the city and the fans? Or is that him actually recognizing that at this point in his career, he's like, look, I'm getting older. It's not getting any easier. So might as well take a little bit less money. I made plenty of it over my career. Let's bring in another guy. And that kind of leads into the topic of, like, okay, what do you do with Tobias? Like, I love Tobias, and it was kind of strange seeing all of Sixers Twitter and Philly fans almost like jump from one side of the fence to the other with how well Tobias played in the playoffs. But yeah, I think that Harden, I think we bring him back. I think he will opt in this year. And honestly, he said it multiple times. He wasn't 100%. There's just no way he was. And I think that we just got a little glimpse of what him and Embiid can be together. And if this is who Harden is now, if he's the distributor, he's the best distributor that Embiid's ever had, and not even close. Sure. So I think if that's who he's going to be, and obviously we want to see him knock down that three ball a little bit more consistently, but I'm excited to see next year. Honestly, going in just clean slate. That's what every offseason is, right? It's just like, okay, let's take a breath, clean slate. It's sometimes, honestly, it's nice now that we're good, but back during the process years, the off season was like the funnest part of the whole season every year.
Yeah.
So it's just nice to kind of take a deep breath and really refocus and get excited for next season, which I am. I think that Embiid and Harden together are going to be great again next year too.
Yeah, definitely. There's an aspect of me that does miss like the lottery parties and just the hype around the draft and everything. And I still go all in on the draft, even with the Sixers not holding a heavy pick and everything. But when looking at this team, I mean, for James Harden, like, obviously it's one thing to sit up there and say you can take less money, and a completely different story when the paperwork's in front of you and when you're talking.
Yep.
But I do think there is an aspect of him who's real enough to recognize what he is at this stage of his career, in terms of, I think that kind of has driven his motivation and moves. When we talk about getting out of Houston, that was him being the sole show there, everything built around him. He wasn't ready for that anymore. When he went to Brooklyn, I think his idea of that is, I'm ready to hand off responsibility, have other guys that can help me, so I don't have to be the guy every single night. And the way Brooklyn worked out, with obviously the vaccine thing with Kyrie, the injuries to KD, it really ended up being James Harden and kind of like a bunch of role players again. And I think that caused frustration there. So I do think there's a part of him that recognizes, like, he's prepared for taking a step back. And now the dollar amount has to somewhat match that for the Sixers to have the flexibility to build a true championship team. But I do have a little bit of hope that he can accept that and accept a price that would dictate that. And also, like you said, like, there just has to be more to him that we haven't seen yet. Like, he's only 32 years old. Like, that is not that old by NBA standards. And there's guys several years older than him still performing at a fairly high level. So I am holding out a little bit of hope that with a full offseason, he's training pretty hard from everything that's seen. If he takes care of his body the right way, that there could be a better version of James Harden next year.
Yep, I couldn't agree with you more. Like you said, there have been little clips that have come out here and there. He looks like he's already in. I don't know, man. I don't know if he just likes to like layer up on clothes just to throw everybody off. But seeing how that works is hilarious. But he looks like he's in great shape. He's obviously in the gym working on his game. So yeah, he's not really a dude too who he doesn't post a ton on social media. He's not very active. He doesn't give a lot of quotes. So any little glimpse that you can see into his off season, I mean, we're seeing exactly what we want. He's in the lab working on it. So, but yeah, I'm right there with you.
And he can kind of like shapeshift with losing and gaining weight faster than like anyone ever.
It's so bizarre. I don't understand. Towards the end of Houston, I remember there was one picture of him like standing in layup line. I'm like, okay, that dude has like one of those like fat suits on or something. Like, I don't know what's going on, because then you saw him the second he got in Brooklyn. I'm like, oh wow, he's in amazing shape. So it might be some game to him. I have no idea, but yeah, you're right. It's wild to see how that dude shapeshifts.
Yeah, it definitely is crazy. To touch on your point about Tobias, that is kind of the crazy factor. Is kind of how much the pendulum has swung throughout like his time in Philadelphia and really this year specifically. And first
Yeah.
off, like I give a ton of respect to Tobias for just like pretty much swallowing blows while he's been there. He's been a guy that's been criticized pretty heavily, has seen his role shift a great deal throughout in terms of what the personnel was, at times being like a legitimate number 2 option, and at times being a guy that has to like just sit in the corner and shoot threes. So that's not the easiest thing to do as a veteran, and the way that he's handled everything has been super admirable. But with kind of all that being said, when you look at this roster, there really is not a lot of like moves that you can kind of do without shifting his salary or without flipping him for something. And kind of like you said on your last podcast, like Tobias being a max player as the number 4 option doesn't quite work. So do you think this is the end of the Tobias Harris era in Philly?
It's a great question, man. It kind of handcuffs him a little bit. And to go back to what you said, I'm right there with you. It's been so cool. There are not a lot of players in the NBA who could go through what he went through, especially in a city like Philly, and come out on the other side where he is right now. Like
Yeah.
all props to him. He's a good dude. We all know that. Off the court, he's awesome. I don't know if you've seen the movie Hustle yet, Adam Sandler's new movie.
I have not.
You
Need
got to
to.
see it. I just saw it last night. Awesome. He's great in that. But it's like I genuinely love Tobias, and the fact that he's made it through all these ups and downs, props to him. But you look at this roster now, and his contract really does handcuff us because there's no way that the 4th option on a team, and I would put him at the 4th option. I would put Maxey honestly over Tobias right now, just as far as offensive output goes. But there's no way you can have a max guy as your 4th option. So what the question is, what do you do with that? Like there are plenty of teams who would take him, but do you just dump him and get a few just kind of middle of the line average like vet guys? Like I don't know, man. I wouldn't be surprised if we ran it back. Truly, I wouldn't be surprised if we just ran it back. The Danny Green situation is such a bummer, and I don't know what we're gonna do there. That one's kind of that sucks. And then Matisse too. Just the way that his season ended was such a bummer as well. So it's like, what do you do with those 2 guys? But I wouldn't be surprised if we ran it back with Tobias, with Harden coming back, obviously Embiid, Maxey, everybody else. But I know Niang's got another year left on his deal, so I pray that we give our young guys minutes. Maybe Paul Reed gets a little bit more run now that DeAndre's not on the team.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would like to see personally. I would like to see Tobias back, just to start. Let him go. We know that the regular season is way different than the playoffs. We know that, but it doesn't hurt to see him go out there and win a bunch of games. I don't think if he's going to consistently be the 4th option on a max deal, it's just that contract that's going to hurt us and not allow us to propel into that next category, which is making the Eastern Conference Finals.
Yeah, definitely. And by the way, being out from the Utah area, what was kind of the perception of Georges Niang following his time with the Jazz and then coming to Philly? And did he live up to that?
Yeah, dude, he lived up to it and then some. So
All right.
Niang is exactly what we saw. I think it was unfair to him because with all the injuries, he was tossed into a role that was much bigger than he than he expected earlier than he thought, right? So with COVID and everybody getting sick and everything, he was just tossed into this like 6-man role where that's not him. He's not a 6-man. And what's funny is when his tenure with the Jazz ended, everybody said the same thing. The dude can shoot the lights out, but he cannot put the ball on the floor and he cannot guard a fly. Like nobody can't guard a soul. And sadly, that's exactly what we saw, right? But again, I would say, especially on that contract that he's on, absolute steal for the production that he gave us. Jazz fans love him, but they were okay to see him go. I think it stung him a little bit that he landed in Philly of all places, which is so funny. We play each other twice a year, but just that whole Rookie of the Year fiasco just kind of created this hilarious little rivalry. But yeah, I think Niang lived up to it and then some. You get that with shooters. They're going to go through streaky shooting times during the season, and that's exactly what he did. But when he was on, man, and it was awesome because he just is one of those dudes. I still feel like it. He's in the NBA, but he still is one of those dudes that like you play pickup and you look at a guy and you're like, yeah, that guy doesn't have it. And then all of a sudden he's got 12 on 4 threes. It's like, okay, maybe I need to get out and guard him. I still feel like he kind of doesn't get that respect in the NBA, which I love having a guy like that on our squad.
Yeah, definitely. And he's a guy like I mean, obviously he's not a guy you want heavily in your rotation in the playoffs, and he
Yeah.
definitely has some holes in his game. But in terms of a regular season player that just brings it every single night, loves talking his shit, nobody
Yep.
turns around to the bench more than Georges Niang. So
Mhm.
he just does a lot that I love, and that is needed on this Sixers team. And I mean, that's kind of been a theme of kind of what's been talked about a ton is like the phrase like needing a dog or needing dogs has kind of been thrown out a ton. But like
Yep.
Niang's kind of the rare guy that brings it on this team, and that's something that I think he deserves a ton of respect for. And they obviously need more guys that can do it because realistically, it's been when you look at the guys that are the hustle players or those kind of the guys that impose themselves in that way on this team, it's really Georges Niang and Joel Embiid, which is not exactly the dynamic that you want.
No, not at all. But I completely agree with you. I don't think that I don't think he was a dog in Utah by any means. And so it was kind of cool that he all of a sudden hopping over to Philly kind of took that role on, which I love
Yeah,
because every team needs somebody like that. Let me rephrase that. Every team that makes a run needs a dog. You have to.
yeah,
Or I mean, you look at the teams who are in the finals right now, both Boston and Golden State, they've got dogs on their squad. Like you have to have somebody like that. And yeah, I love Niang, man. I that contract that Daryl Morey signed him to, I think is absolute steal. And good for Niang. I think after the season, he's gonna get a nice little payday, and he deserves it.
yeah, 100%. A little more controversial topic is Doc Rivers and the Sixers. I think it's kind of interesting the kind of wide variety of perceptions of Doc Rivers, and really, I think the way this season ended kind of excused him in a lot of ways. I personally, he impressed me with how he coached in the playoffs. I thought he was more creative than I've seen in his entire time here. I thought he tried things that he's been hesitant to, and obviously a lot of that was because he was handcuffed with Joel Embiid being injured, with the different circumstances that popped up. Matisse obviously not being able to play in Canada, things like that forced
Mhm.
his hand at these. But I mean, once again, not making it past the second round. There's obviously some concerns with just the stubbornness and obviously the DeAndre Jordan experience. And he finally did play Paul Reed, so he does deserve respect for that too.
You're
But
right.
what's your overall perception of Doc Rivers and his outlook moving forward?
I'm right there with you, Sean. I think that he surprised me, and I think a lot of other Philly fans with how he
Yeah.
showed up in that Toronto series. That's the best coaching he's had since clearly he got to Philly. And even in the Miami series, I think he took a lot of stray bullets and caught a lot of those because of injury. Granted, I would have loved, and everybody would have loved to see Paul Reed play maybe during the regular season so that he doesn't make those rookie mistakes during the playoffs. I will be absolutely shocked if we don't see Reed get minutes and our younger guys start to get minutes next season. I pray that it's one of those live and learn things. I don't know if DeAndre like had some blackmail against Doc or something. I don't know what was going on, but it kind of made you think towards the end. It's like, okay, there's no real good reason why DeAndre Jordan should be getting minutes, but I'm right there with him. I was impressed. I thought that this playoffs he actually showed up. I thought his game plans were really spot on, especially during the Toronto series, minus the one game where we just didn't show up. I was very impressed, and I was the first to admit it. I remember tweeting something during I think it was after Game 4, where I'm like, wow, like this is the most prepared the Sixers have looked in the playoffs in a really long time. So I
Yeah.
mean, going from the Brett Brown experience, which I love Brett Brown. I think he was the perfect coach for that time period. I think he did an awesome job. But now it's just, yeah, I was impressed. I personally, I've mentioned this on my podcast as well. I love Quinn Snyder. I think Quinn
Mhm.
Snyder is one of the best coaches in the entire NBA. And I don't know how that could work out, but I would do unspeakable things to see Quinn Snyder coach the Sixers roster. I love Quinn Snyder, but I know I'm a realist, and I think Doc Rivers will be our coach. And
Mhm.
I'm looking forward to next season. Hopefully he makes, like I said, live and learn, like learn from what happened last season. And let's get those young guys some minutes early on.
Yeah, definitely. The whole Quinn Snyder thing was very weird how that all kind of went down. And I mean, I'm judging by just like the timeline of things. I'm assuming he has no interest in coaching this year. He seems to want a little bit of time off, but definitely kind of strange how there was like a last minute him kind of squeezing out and everything that went down there.
Very weird. And did you
Yeah.
catch the press conference at all? His
I s-
exit?
I saw the highlights of it. I didn't watch the whole thing.
Super weird, man. It
Yeah.
was just the vibe of he was like overly emotional, which I get. He coached there for a really long time, but it was very strange just to see Danny Ainge and Ryan Smith, the Jazz owner, who were up there, and Danny Ainge kept making remarks. Like, he straight up said, like, I think that I fully expect Quinn Snyder to coach somewhere next year. And I think that he'll be a sought after coach. So it's like, okay, like, did he get forced out? Does he really have issues with somebody on the team or the direction that the ownership wants to go with the roster? Like, I don't know. It was very, very strange. And it's been kind of, again, it's funny. I don't hate the Jazz. I'm not a Jazz fan. But I live in the state, so it's fun to watch. I watch every Jazz game and I root for them. But it's been kind of funny to see just the whole state and how they flip flop back and forth, and how they thought that Donovan and Rudy didn't have beef with each other. And now it's almost like the whole state's turned on Donovan Mitchell and they want to keep Rudy and build around Rudy. It's very bizarre. It's a very weird vibe here in the entire state. And yeah, it's very weird. That Quinn Snyder thing was super odd. And I personally think that, like you said, I think he's going to sit a year. I would be shocked if he isn't in San Antonio, kind of being the successor to Popovich. That's what I would put my money on. But yeah, if he's coaching somewhere this year, then, because I think he's still got 1 year left on his deal, so the Jazz would have to work something out, like trade him or something. But yeah, if he's coaching this year, then some bigger issue was up, because yeah, it was weird all the way around.
Yeah, definitely. It was also weird how they were saying how like they wanted his input on like the new coach
Yeah,
and that kind of thing. It's like I just don't really understand what's
no,
the
when is that?
situation.
Yeah, when does
Yeah,
that ever happen? Unless it's like Popovich who's retiring and riding off into the sunset. Like,
right.
it just, yeah, it's weird, man. All of it, the whole situation and everything surrounding it just fell off.
Yeah, definitely. I do think that's a good shout about Quinn Snyder and San Antonio. That would make a lot of sense. I
Yeah,
totally agree. I would love him as a Sixers coach. I don't really see the realism in it happening, but it would
no,
be awesome.
in the
For Doc
dream.
Rivers, yeah. For
Yeah.
Doc Rivers specifically, like for this year, he just really didn't give a reason to fire him. And I think kind of like the biggest thing is it's at this point isn't really his coaching, it's more his like demeanor and personality that I think that rubs everyone the wrong way. And I think like
Hmm.
if you can separate those two based on like how he is in the press room and how he has been on the sideline, I think it's two very different perceptions of him, which obviously you want a coach who isn't standing up there and being, oh, I know ball more than you in the press conference, but kind of like if he's doing his job, which he did this year way more than last year, I was way more critical of him last year, then you kind of got
Hmm.
to take the lumps with it. And it is kind of interesting. Like the the organization has just doubled and tripled and quadrupled down on how committed they are to Doc Rivers and how him and Morey, their relationship. Dave Early had a really nice piece, kind of connecting the dots on all the Morey
Excellent
and
piece.
yeah, the Doc and Morey relationship. Yeah, definitely give that a read. But I don't know. Feels like there's a little bit of a disconnect just between like the Morey and Rivers timeline or the relationship and the tunnel between them. Do you see that as the case, or what do you think there?
Man, that's a good question. That piece was awesome to read. I recommend everybody check it out. But it did kind of seem funny, because all of a sudden we're looking for a coach, and Doc Rivers almost just like fell in our lap. Like, it was all of a
Yeah.
sudden like I don't think that was the direction we were going to go by any means. And then all of a sudden LA lets him go, and it's like, well, like, he's a great coach. Like, he's got a track record. Like, let's just give this thing a run. That's almost what it felt like to me. Again, I don't know. I could be totally wrong, but I'm with you. I was 2 seasons ago. I was not at all on the Doc bandwagon one bit. And this last season, I was actually. I'll give him props, just like you. I thought he did a good job. And all
Mhm.
things considered, like we talked about in the playoffs too, he's just making the best with the situation he's dealt. So yeah, I don't know. It just is. It's fascinating to look at. I don't know if how do you know how many more years left does Doc have on his deal? A few,
Uh,
right?
2, yeah, I think
2,
2.
yeah, yeah. Because yeah, you're right. Every single time that there's any rumor or anything like that, the team just comes out and doubles down. Like, nope, Doc's our guy. Not even a question. He's coaching the team moving forward. So yeah, like you said, it's the realist part of you has to come out and be like, okay, unless we start the season next year like 0-10, Doc's going to
Mhm.
be the coach of this team through the playoffs. So yeah, it just goes back to what we talked about. It's like, all right, make the adjustments, learn from your mistakes, man. That's what it's all about. And like you said, nobody likes having the guy who he got super defensive during the playoffs
Yeah.
when everybody was talking about, oh, you give up so many like you give up series leads. It all comes down to you. Look at your track record. And then he got super defensive. The human element side of things, of course, he got defensive. Like,
Right.
it's not all his fault. At some point, you got to look at it and be like, okay, these coincidences are a little wild. because it keeps happening. But I get he got defensive. That's fine. But it's that demeanor of not that like, calling reporters out. I remember he called a couple reporters out during this year, and it just felt kind of weird. And Philly is not the place to do that at all. 0%. Like that can fly. You do that in LA, great. You do that in Utah, you can do whatever you want in Utah. Philly is neither of those places. So yeah, hopefully it is. It's funny. It's that demeanor and that I don't want to say acting like he's better or knows ball more, but it kind of sometimes comes off like that.
Yeah, definitely. And I just looked it up. There's 3 more years on the deal, which
3. Okay.
yeah.
A
I
lot.
do think it is a lot. I do think the money with that had a lot to do with kind of the decision and why they are so secure. And I mean, I get it from a franchise perspective, swallowing that amount of cash. I mean, it was a 5-year, $40 million deal when he agreed to come here, which is a nice paycheck for a coach.
Yeah.
He's up there in the top 5 in the NBA. So that's not really something that you want to sign on for another additional thing. That's kind of why I thought the potential Lakers deal made a lot of sense, but obviously that didn't go down. And I think Darvin Ham's going to be a terrific coach out there. But I don't know. It's very kind of weird. The B-ball Paul thing is kind of the best example for me, where I think it took on like kind of a life of its own in terms of like B-ball Paul represented a whole like subcategory of basketball that Doc Rivers just like despises. When you talk about like the versatility, the small ball, modern basketball, and like when he's saying like this isn't the B-ball Paul victory tour after the game, it's like, dude, are you serious? But
not a good quote.
yeah, not at all. So that definitely kind of took on a life of his own. I think a lot of it is kind of just like him becoming overly defensive about this and him having his heels so dug in the spot where even when he gets to the point where he's clearly wrong, he kind of can't bring himself off it.
Yep, I completely agree. Yeah, the B-ball Paul example is perfect. I tried to forget about the whole victory tour thing. That was such a bizarre thing. It's like there again, like there's no harm in being like, yeah, like he's playing great. Let's give him his flowers. He's a young guy. He got minutes. Great. The whole victory tour, that was so weird, man. That was such a bizarre thing to say, especially the timing of it. That was the weirdest part. You say that at like the second week into the season, it's like, oh, haha, cool, whatever. But the timing of that was very, very bizarre. I think that's a perfect example, though.
Yeah, definitely. And like this is a guy who's the 58th overall pick. Like this isn't like he wasn't projected to be the superstar player. That's like
he's not a lottery pick.
Yeah, like be happy for the guy. He just had the game of
Yes.
his life. And I do genuinely believe that like that game, which he played out of his mind and did everything on the court, that was Doc throwing him and being like, I want you guys to see why he's not ready. And then he went and balled out and kind of earned his spot.
Completely agree. That was him actually showing up and being like, cool, you're giving me minutes. I'm not going to make a fool of myself. I'm going to actually show you that I belong here.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep.
Now, to move on a little bit to looking forward to next season. So, obviously, there's still a lot in the air for free agency. The Harden contract's the biggest chip that still needs to fall. The draft is coming up in less than 2 weeks. Sixers do have the 23rd pick after Brooklyn deferred to next season. Do you think they keep this pick, and are there any guys you have your eyes on, or what are your thoughts there?
I will be shocked if we keep it, truly.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we talked about Golden State and Boston a little bit earlier, but you look at teams like that, they're homegrown. They're homegrown guys where they have the perfect amount of dudes who they've drafted who either are on an end of a rookie deal. I keep thinking of Maxey, but he's an anomaly because nobody expected him to make the jump that he did. But you have dudes just like Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum, Marcus Smart, homegrown dudes that they drafted who are now on to their second contracts. But then you have dudes off the bench like Grant Williams, Peyton Pritchard. You look at Golden State side of things. I mean, their roster, everybody knows it, but the Jordan Poole, like you have to play this perfectly, and you have to use your mid-level. You have to use it the perfect way. So I will personally be shocked if we keep it, only because we have so many young guys currently on the roster, and that's what bugs me so bad about them not getting any minutes. You need guys like that to produce, because Danny Green's not going to play next year. Like, we know that. So I would fully expect, maybe they'll work something out with him and he becomes a coach. They'll offload his contract. I don't know what's going to happen, but I think that we will move it for a piece. Who, I have no idea. But if we do keep it, there's one guy who I love, and it's Liddell from Ohio State. I'm a big fan. Yep. I think he's going to be an absolute stud in the league. And if we do keep it and he's still on the board, that's who I would absolutely love to take. But I will be shocked if we keep it. Again, I just think that we're in such a unique little time frame and window here with Harden getting older. Embiid, I mean, bless his heart, this was his best season by far, and he played the most games. But it's like we know we just know the way he plays and the way his body is that he's going to get hurt. So knock on wood that doesn't happen. But like our window is now, in these next couple of years, it's like okay, we have to go all or nothing. So whatever that takes, and I would love to be proven wrong, but I just don't see a guy drafted at 23 stepping in right away and getting meaningful minutes on this team. So maybe, I don't know. We'll see, but I would love to know who you think. You said that you were scouting the draft and still do just as hard now as you did during the process days. Are there guys who
Yeah.
you would like us to take?
Yeah, personally, I am team stay at 23 and make a selection. I also agree that I think it's more likely than not they trade it. I think they kind of flip it for some sort of role player, make that happen. But for
Yeah,
a lot of the same reasons that you said about like being homegrown, and for me, the contract thing's the biggest thing that jumps out in terms of like you have these guys on the cost controlled contract for several years and like get a true evaluation if this is like a long term piece or not. When looking at
yeah,
23, I agree. I love EJ Liddell too. I think he projects great in the NBA. I wouldn't be surprised if he's off the board a little before the Sixers. He seems to be picking up more and more buzz. So he seems to me like a guy a team might move up and get or take a little early. I also
yeah.
love Marshawn Beauchamp from the G League Ignite. I think he's going to
Hmm.
be very good. He's very Matisse Thybulle like, but I just believe in his offense more. And even though the shooting numbers aren't great, like he's a guy I just genuinely believe will produce more and will improve at a greater rate. I have an interview next week with the G League Ignite head coach, so I'm curious to get more
Sweet.
intel on him. So make sure you guys check that out next week as well. Another guy is Jalen Williams from Santa Clara, who
Yeah,
interesting player, kind of a guy that came out of nowhere, has just improved greatly this year. 7'2" wingspan, just a ton of guys. There's a ton of guys in this range that are like what the Sixers are looking for in terms of wings, athletic, and guys that have like 2 or 3 years experience, which is something that gives me hope for them being
huge.
able to contribute. All three of these guys I just mentioned are 21 years old and have 3 years of experience. Beauchamp's a little different because he took the JUCO route and then G League Ignite, so a little bit different path there. Might not be as NBA ready, but they're guys that I think that can contribute on the team, and I would love to see. So I agree. I don't know if it happens. I mean, we're looking back at last year drafting Jaden Springer. He's about as raw as they come for guys coming out of the draft, and I still believe in Springer pretty heavily in the long term. I think he projects great defensively. I think he's ready right now, and offensively he improved quicker than I thought. But I do
Hmm.
think there's like a young core developing. I don't want to say in the post Embiid era, but I think there's like a group that could be developed that I don't have an issue adding to, and with the hopes that they can contribute right now.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think those three guys you named are, like you said, there's a bunch of dudes in that window where if we do pick somebody, we have to take a wing, a wing who can guard
Yeah.
and a 3-and-D guy, right? That's exactly who we need. And I talked about this on my last podcast, but anytime I say 3-and-D, I immediately think of Bridges, and it just kind of tears at my soul a little bit because he would literally be perfect on this team. But yeah, somebody, I'm not saying like him, but somebody, a watered down version of Bridges, just a wing guy who can go out there and defend. We need that badly. Yes, we have Matisse. I What do you think we do with Matisse? Do you think we try to move him? Do you think we stick with it? Like I said, just last season was such a bummer, and all the air was kind of just deflated from. I mean, Philly loves Matisse and always has, and then just the whole Toronto thing and not being able to play, it just felt like all the air was kind of sucked out of the building.
Yeah, it's tough. Very quick fall from graces for Matisse Thybulle this year. And
Yeah,
I will say I am probably, if I'm picking one guy on the roster that is a must move to me, it's Matisse Thybulle. And I think
yeah,
that's somewhat of a surprise to people. But it's like I've lost complete confidence in him being able to improve at an offensive rate that he can be on the floor for more. And defensively, like I wrote an article a couple weeks ago comparing him to Trayvon Diggs, and I mean that in the factor of like
yeah, yeah,
he doesn't get he's not a team defender in the aspect of like his rotations, the way he just goes for steals and blocks, like it throws everybody off. And Embiid is a guy I think he makes look bad a ton of times from when he lets guys come in front, try to get the block from behind, forces Embiid to step up, and then his man scores. And I see that happen a lot of times. So like as much as I do think you can get a buy-in from a team around the league to like project as this is this ridiculous defensive prospect, a guy that he's only 25 years old still has a lot of appeal, but I just don't think he can ever contribute on like a championship team because of the holes in his game.
yeah. I agree with that. It's been such a
Mhm.
bummer. Every year you feel like you're saying the same thing because his
Yeah,
defensive stats stand off the charts, and he's an anomaly because with the minutes he gets, if he got like actual starter minutes, he would blow every defensive statistic out of the water.
yeah,
But you can't play him that many minutes because he has zero offensive game and zero outside shot. And it's been such a bummer to see just the lack of growth. Like there literally hasn't been anything. He'll have little glimpses in games here and there where it's like, okay, wow, he hit a couple threes. And then he'll have a stretch of like 6 games where it's like, dude, you did nothing. Like,
Yeah.
especially with, like you said, with Embiid on the defensive side of the ball, of course. Like when he gambles and goes for those steals and goes for those blocks, then it leaves Embiid in that awkward like 2-on-1 situation down low where he's got to make a decision or draw a foul, and that sucks. But even on the offensive side of things, Embiid has become such a better passer out of the post, especially during the last 2 seasons. Like it's no coincidence that he was runner up for MVP both years, but it's like his vision, his patience, everything has gotten so much better. So to have a guy in the corner who can't shoot is so brutal. And I just like to echo what you said, not only on the defensive side of the ball, but I think on the offensive side of the ball that it hurts Embiid just as much.
Yeah, and I don't get as caught up in the stats with him because I mean he's attempted pretty much the same amount, which is more concerning to me than the percentage.
Yep.
The amount he attempts, like the percentages change so quickly because he just doesn't shoot it. The thing that is like the biggest red flag for me is just like eye test watching how like unconfident he is to like shooting the ball. Like you can tell he just wants no part of it, and it's like at this stage of his career, like this guy spent 4 seasons in college and now 3 years in the NBA. Like you just have to be a little bit farther along at this point.
Yep, couldn't agree more. And then you have a guy like Danny Green who's on the complete opposite end of the spectrum and launches, which I appreciate. You got to have a guy like that, and Niang and Danny Green both are like that. But yeah, it's brutal, man. I'm right there with you. If I'd be curious to see maybe we package Matisse in the pick and go out and get somebody, because I think you're right. There are for sure teams who, I mean, he does have upside, and I think there are teams who will take a chance on him and take a flyer on his shooting. But I think that, as sad as it is, I think the Matisse we see now is the Matisse this is who he is. Like I don't. I would love to be proven wrong, but I just simply don't see it.
Yeah, unfortunately, I agree with that as well, and it's so frustrating. A guy like Embiid, who's obviously terrific, we talked about a ton. Like it should be easier to put a team around him than it has been, and it's been so frustrating the failed roster construction these past few years. And this just to me seems like an offseason we absolutely have to get right, because I can't imagine that his patience is incredibly long at this point. Like this has to be the most frustrated that he's ever been with the Sixers organization.
Yep, 100%. Like I mentioned earlier, like this next few years is our window. Like this is our championship window, realistically. I think with Harden, if we bring on another star, I would love that. But like these next few years is for sure our window. And the last thing I want to see is some Embiid growing impatient, having some fallout, kind of like Iverson, where we trade him. And Iverson, obviously, Philly legend, they'll be loved for forever. But towards the end of his time in Philly, it just was such a bummer. Like, I do not want that same thing to happen with Embiid. I want Embiid to be a lifer. And for that to happen, we have to construct the perfect roster around him. And honestly, I mean, everybody loves Daryl Morey. I love him. Person, what he does, he's a man. But I fully believe that he will this offseason construct and pull some strings and do everything he can to make a little run here in the next couple of years. I mean, we have to. And I mean, that's the thing that gets lost, right? All of us fans are just so frustrated, and we like to blame and like to pick a scapegoat. Like dudes like Morey want to win a championship just as bad as anybody else. So I fully believe that he's going to do everything in his power to make that happen these next couple of years, because I think he knows it better than anybody that this is our window.
Yeah, totally. Couldn't agree more. And Morey's legacy is on the line just as much as anybody. So if that doesn't drive him, I don't know what will. So I agree. I think he's going to put the pieces together. I think it's a huge offseason. Obviously, we still have a ton to watch out for. Josh, thank you so much for coming on and talking with me today. Let everybody know where they can find you at.
Of course, Sean. Again, man, I really appreciate it. Find me on Twitter. Josh Reynolds 24 is my personal, and again, my podcast. That's Ball, folks. Just got it launched, just off the ground. Would absolutely love to have you guys tune in and listen. Yeah, Sean, you're the man, dude. I really appreciate you having me on here.
Yeah, it was awesome talking with you. And make sure to check out That's Ball, folks. 2 awesome episodes out. He had 3 Cone and Ninja bands on this past one. Some funny stuff about the Pat Riley presser and everything else going on in the basketball world. So make sure that you guys check that out as well. And